Welcome to Talking With, where we pull back the curtain on some unusual and interesting people. Today, our unusual and interesting person is the Grand Poobah of Poobah Industries, Mr. John Powers. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Gil.
So let's get this Poobah thing out of the way right at the start here. There's some wonderful stories about you, but the Grand Poobah, now where did that come from and why?
Well, a good friend of mine back in the Bay Area, he and I worked together. In fact, we were business partners on one of our new ventures. And he would call me the Grand Poobah. I don't know where that came from. And it sounded kind of fun. And I always kind of wanted to be a little tongue-in-cheek when I was doing my own independent contracting and building apps and things like that. So I said, I'll call myself the Grand Poobah. And it stuck. So I got the web name and the URL for it and everything. And so now, by the way, if you're more comfortable, you're welcome to call me Grand.
Just Grand, not John, but Grand.
Grand is fine.
Grand is fine.
I answer to that as well.
Excellent. Well, it was popularized by Gilbert and Sullivan in the Mikado. So that's an origin for it. So I thought maybe you had something to do with that. Anyway, so we now have got that. So you are the Grand Poobah of Poobah Industries, which does a lot of very interesting things. But I want to go back a little bit further. I'm going to go back to Ohio and some education. Tell me about that.
Well, let's even go a little step before Ohio. And there, in one's career, there are opportunities that come up that are career changing, and that's where the first one came. And it was in Indiana, West Lafayette, Indiana, Purdue University. I was in the graduate school in psychology, and I had a research assistantship, and I was doing research in human learning and problem solving. Back then, of course, this is like in the mid-'60s, right? Nobody had personal computers. They had these big mainframe computers, and you'd take your Hollerith punch cards and you'd run them. You'd turn them in at the counter and then come back in 3 or 4 hours and hope they ran them and you had your results. But and my professor, the only thing he knew about computers was he knew that they were used to do statistics, analysis of variance and things like that. And that's all I knew, too. College, there was no computers there. So I lived as a graduate student, I lived in a graduate dormitory, brand new one, nice, beautiful building. We called it the Purdue Hilton. And so one evening I'm sitting at my desk working, and we'd leave the doors open in the hall and just why not? People would wander around. And so I'm working at my desk, and two of my friends who were electrical engineers in a advanced degree program came by and said, hey, we're going over to Cranert to use the computer. You want to come? And I'm always looking for a good distraction when I'm supposed to be doing something important like homework, right? So I said, sure, I'll come along. So I went with them to Cranert. I think it was the Cranert Business School, and they had their own computer. And it was a IBM 1620. They'd kind of call it a mainframe computer. And so I went with them, and I'm tagging along. I don't know what we're getting into. And so they go into this room. It's pitch black. They flip a switch. In this room is all this computer equipment. There's punch card readers, there's printers, there's sorters, and there's a console and memory for this IBM 1620 computer. And it was a pretty substantial computer, not considered a super one or anything. And the lights came on, and I looked at all this, and I said, oh, my goodness, this is where I want to be. This is where I want to be. There was something about all this. And so one of them so what you could do, and you didn't have to be a business degree manager, you could take a quick little course, get a license to run the computer by yourself. And you could come in the evening, you'd sign up for it, and you could turn the main switch, power switch, and power up the computer. So cool. And it had a typewriter console that you kind of got things started with, and you'd punch in a few codes, and the computer would clear its memory and kind of say, yes, master, what can I do for you? And so one of the two guys, the engineers, was working on the computer, and the other one said, his name was Larry. He said, hey, I want to learn programming for this thing. You want to come in the room and help me? I said, sure, why not? I've never even heard of programming, you know. So we had a whiteboard, and we sat there, and we learned assembly language. Now, assembly language is the down and dirty of programming a computer. It's mnemonics that represents the actual machine codes that make that puppy run. And so here, I didn't know that this was kind of like the hard way to do it, you know, that there were higher level languages that did it. So we sat down, I learned assembly language, I loved it. I loved it. In fact, the following year, when I was married and Janie we were living in graduate student housing, she would come over with me to use the IBM 1620, and I'd written her a little slot machine program on the IBM 1620. So here we are, 1620, typewriter, that's how you interacted with it, and it was playing slot machines with my wife. So we had a good time with that. So that was a turning point when I saw that computer. And I went to my professor and said, I want to do something with this computer. Well, he didn't know anything about computers. He was not comfortable with me working on computers because he wouldn't be able to evaluate my work. He wouldn't be able to criticize. He says, well, if you've got some projects on the side you want to do, that's okay. But as long as you do what you need to do for me and for my classes, that's fine. So I decided I wanted to teach that 1620 how to, quote, talk in natural language. And of course, it couldn't talk at all. It would just generate these punch cards that had printing on them, and you could see what it was. So I proceeded with my own project I had a model, a language model that I had created, the mathematical model. And so I proceeded to tell it to generate these sentences, and I would critique the sentences, typing in a critique to it, and then give it another chance to generate a better sentence. Well, the whole project was noble in its effort. The computer was not up to the task. It would take the computer 20 minutes to generate a sentence. That's as fast as it could run. That's the only thing it was doing, this computer. And so it was fun in the effort, and I showed it to my professor, and, you know, he didn't understand it, but that's okay. And so that was my introduction to computers. And little did I know that, what is it now, 60 years ago, I was doing what we now call large language modeling, and they call it ChatGPT. I was doing the same kind of thing then that they do now, and it was just very early on. I was using mathematical models trying to create mathematical models of language. And this was 60 years ago. The computer was not up to the task. So now that we have supercomputers and we got the internet, it's really working well. So,
wow, what a fascinating story, John. You and I have talked over the years about some of your early days in the computer world and how you worked at Atari and some of those places. So you took all this information from working with this computer, this 1620, and where did it go after that? Did you abandon psychology?
Well, no, I stayed with psychology. That was my major. And my professor and I agreed I wanted to pursue more in the computer field. There was no such thing as a computer science degree back then, so you couldn't get one. There's no such thing. And so I said I wanted to pursue it. And he says, well, it's best that you don't continue with me because I cannot evaluate your work. So we said, let's wrap it up at the master's, and I'll go out in the world of work. And so I started looking around for a job, and the market was hot. Oh, my goodness. I naively didn't know that if you have a background in psychology, my specialty in psychology was human learning and problem solving, and you were involved and knew about computers, that people would love for you to have them work for them. I didn't know that. So I went out interviewing, and it was principally companies that did contract research, HRB Singer, MITRE, IBM, Federal Systems Division. I went all over the East Coast interviewing for jobs and got 7 job offers. I can't believe it. It was great. And so the one I liked the best was at a place called Battelle, then called Battelle Memorial Institute, which was a contract research center that did research for governments, private industry, whatever. And spent 11 years there doing all these projects and just having a ball. And they had a supercomputer, and they hired me half-time computer department, half-time in the behavioral science department doing behavioral science research. And so it was a ball. It was great. So went from there.
Fabulous. But somehow all of that and you migrated to California, kind of the hotbed of the computer world. When did that occur?
Oh, that occurred a few years later. That's another major turning point. That's a good question. I worked with a lot of really good people at Battelle, and one of them and I kind of clicked, and we said, let's start our own business. So this is my first toe in the water for entrepreneurship. And we wanted to do computer-assisted instruction, which was a pretty hot topic at the time. Control Data had purchased commercial rights from the University of Illinois for their Plato system, which was a large-scale computer-assisted instruction system. And so we formed our own company to do that, and we got involved in that and doing a little other side projects. And one of them was a project for a local cable company, and they wanted to track failures in their system, and so they contract with us to create a color online, quote, online color map of their system that would flag where errors were in their system and breakdowns. So we needed to buy a color terminal, and we heard that there was a shop in downtown Columbus that sold AV equipment that had the terminal we want. So we went there on like a Friday afternoon, and it was wet and rainy and dark in the winter. And we walked in, we started looking around, and so this guy appears from the back. He's got a three-piece suit on. He's got gold chain on his right wrist. He's got a fancy watch on his left wrist, and his cologne you could smell 10 feet away. This is not an AV salesman. Something was up. And he said, do you guys program computers? I said, yeah, we do. We do a lot of programming. He said, come here, I want to show you something. So we go in the back and we walk up these stairs, and it's literally an attic of this building. And there's these people working, and there's this engineer with a soldering iron, and he's got his technician next to him, and they've got their oscilloscopes up, and he's working on this circuit board. And you can tell something. He said, we've got to do a presentation to Montgomery Ward tomorrow, and we need some software. Can you write some software for us now? Like that. And we said, well, we didn't even know what they're working on. Well, it was a 1802, RCA 1802 microprocessor. We've never done microprocessors, but we're not going to tell them that. So we said, yeah, we'll work for you. And I'll tell you what, since this is kind of a new field, we'll give you a break on our hourly rate. And he said, well, good. Can you do something for us tomorrow? That we can take tomorrow to the Montgomery Ward presentation? And I said, well, yeah, sure. You got a room with a whiteboard or something? So I pick up the phone. I called Janie. I said, Janie, it's about 4 o'clock. I said, can you bring us something to eat? I don't think we're coming home tonight. So we worked straight through overnight, and we wrote an operating system for their little microprocessor. It was a home computer to be sold by Montgomery Ward. That's what they hoped. We wrote an operating system for it, and we wrote some demo programs in 1802 assembler language. So it's all new to us. We really worked out. It was fun. It was really fun generating that. They took it off. They had a hit. Montgomery Ward said, we'll give you an invoice, an order for 50,000 units. That's what they wanted. And then they wanted to take it to the bank, so they did. So they talked to us. I said, well, can you do some more software? So we did. We ended up getting exclusive software rights to their home computer to be sold by Montgomery Ward. And in time, they acquired us. They bought all our assets, and we became employees of the company. And in time, they went bankrupt. So they had we like to think they had terrific software, but they had problems with production issues. And so the company went under, And we had, what do we do now? Do we go back to our contracting work or whatever? And I said, well, I'm going to look around a little bit. It ends up I had a friend in California who said, you got to come out here. It's the mother lode of computers out here. You got to come here. He said, I got a great recruiter you can use. And I said, oh, okay, I'll give it a try. So I get this call. Atari wants to talk to me. And I'm going, what? Atari? Everybody knew Atari. I mean, this was like God wanted to speak. So, they flew me out there. And they said, we're having a conference, an important meeting of some of our board and some of our key people and marketing people. And it happened to be at a resort outside of San Jose. So that's where they took me. So I'm at the swimming pool in California. It's my first visit to California. And you got to remember, I'm from Ohio. So California is a foreign country. I thought I'd have to have a passport to get there. I mean, it's so exotic, its reputation. So I'm sitting at the swimming pool, and they said, Mike Moon wants to talk to you. And I didn't know who Mike Moon was. So this Mike Moon, oh, by the way, I should note, this is soon after Warner Brothers acquired Atari. And they were on a big growth kind of a thing. So I knew that Warner Brothers was connected. So Mike Moon, this guy comes walking over. He looks like a movie star. And I'm going, oh my goodness, it's somebody from Warner Brothers. And I know he looks so classy. I must know, is he a movie star? He's coming over to talk to me, and I don't even know his name. Well, it ends up that he wasn't a movie star. He was the president of Atari. His name was Mike Moon, and he wanted to introduce himself, but he looked like a movie star, and he dressed like one. So that was my first introduction, not only to California, but to Atari. They ended up hiring me and ended up being a manager of their software development, and it just goes on from there. So,
wow, what a wonderful career! What were the years that you were at Atari? What year was that?
Oh, it was 80 to 82. That was the tumultuous years. I look back at it and I call it my white knuckle roller coaster ride. It was up and down. Atari was the new management from Warner Brothers was trying to turn Atari into kind of a serious development site where they could crank out lots of software and make millions of money. And they were trying to transition it to an IBM kind of a mentality. You don't do that at Atari. And of course, that's what they tried to get me to do. And I'm, in all earnesty, trying to help them out do that. It just didn't work. And so it started to get a little crazy there. And it got even crazier after that. And I got a phone call from a recruiter, said, I got a job. This company is going to build a notebook computer. And it'll be the first of its kind ever. And they want to talk to you about managing software development for it. And so, I talked to him, and that was another opportunity that popped up. So,
and that company was?
Convergent Technologies. They had the reputation of being the Marine Corps of the Silicon Bay area. And they were. I mean, life there at Convergent was boot camp 24 hours a day. I mean, I felt like I was doing intellectual push-ups all the time. So we actually did it. We got the software done in 9 months. I mean, this is like, I didn't know that this was kind of like record-breaking. I mean, everybody worked great. What a nice team. We had a wonderful team. They set us aside, let us do the way we thought it was right. And we had good leadership, and we got it done. So, by the way, they went bankrupt too.
Well, then you went to work for another small company. I think it was called Apple or Carrot or something, wasn't it?
Oh yeah. That was years later. I decided I did have a stint at the Learning Company as a VP of development, but I decided I want to go independent again. I like this entrepreneurial life. It's really cool. So I was doing contract work, and I called a friend of mine who happened to work at Apple. He was on the development team for the work slate, and he was really good. And so he had moved up in the world. He'd worked for HP and he eventually got a job at Apple. I didn't even sure what his Apple job was. And so I called him up and I said, Brody, I'm doing contracting. You got any leads for me? And so he said, well, I might have one for you. We might have a need here at Apple. Let me put you in touch, or I'll have somebody get in touch with you. So that ended up being the instructional development department. They did all the manuals, the printed manuals and the online stuff and the electronic stuff that supported all of the Apple computers. Boy, they were an impressive team of writers and graphic designers, and I was the engineer in the department, trying to create animations of how things do and things like that. So that was but I did as a contractor for a year, and then they invited me to become as an employee, and I jumped on it. Apple was great. I loved it there. It was really good.
How long were you at Apple?
I was there 2 years. It seems like it feels longer. Maybe I was longer. I'm not quite sure.
It's possible.
But it just went by so quickly. You just had a really good time there.
Well, as your career moved on and you finally retired here to Nevada County, but that didn't stop you from your entrepreneurial pursuits. And I have here next to me a list of programs that you have written that are just extremely interesting. I'd like to just run down the list and have you tell me something about them. So first of all, there's WeatherCat, and then there's WeatherCat RCP, and then there's WeatherCat for iPad, and then there's WeatherCat for Apple TV, and then there's Beer Master, and then there's Big Buds, and there's Farm Guide and Wine Master. So what is all of that?
Well, I always believed, I got into programming mobile devices very early when a friend had a Palm Pilot that he pulled out of his pocket, and I said, that's so cool. I got to do something with that. So I started writing apps for the Palm Pilot, and so you write apps in things that you know and love. So unless somebody gives you a huge contract, but I was doing this solo. So I said, I really enjoy wine. I'm going to write an app about wine. So my first app was about wine for the Palm Pilot, and then I did one about beer because I like that too. So, and then the Apple iPhone came along, so I saw the writing on the wall. That's where things were going to go. So I rewrote those for the Apple, and that's where Wine Master and Beer Master came from. And we had a neighborhood gathering. We gathered all our neighbors over to our house, and we had a potluck, and we just, everybody went around, talked about what they did. I talked about what I did. I said something about Beer Master to one of my neighbors, and he came up later and said, tell me more about it. And he said, I've got an app. That'd be perfect, what I think you should write about. And I said, what is it? And he says, it's cannabis. I said, oh, what? Huh? What? Cannabis? Well, he knew a lot about cannabis. He had come from Mendocino, moved into our area, as many have, and had a strong interest in cannabis. And so I said, well, write up something how you would see Beer Master for cannabis. And so he did. And he came up with a good idea. And I said, let's go for it. I'll write it. We'll market it. And I'll give you a percentage, royalty percentage. And we called it, but we didn't know quite how to market it. So we contacted a fellow that had written a lot of books, and they were called Big Buds, all about cannabis. So he knew him, and we went to Berkeley, and got a license to use his book material as a source for an app about cannabis, and we called it Big Buds. And that was a real education. So in that case, I must admit that while I've tasted wine and enjoyed it and wrote the app, and I've tasted beer and enjoyed it and took the app, I wrote the app about cannabis without ever tasting it. So it seemed to work out okay.
And so the app did what?
So it basically was a kind of a library of cannabis seeds and buds. And you could look up Diesel or any other one. It had beautiful photographs. It had advice. Ed Rosenthal was the one who wrote the books, and he's famous in the industry. He had advice about how to plant them, what's the best climate, And people love the pictures, beautiful pictures of cannabis buds and flowering and things like that. And they all look very different. And so that's basically what it was. So,
well, you have programmed some very interesting things over the years. As I tell the audience that John and I meet once a month for breakfast, and every time we meet, John comes with something new. And so you've been playing with some new adventures with, started out with Arduino, and a lot of people probably don't know what that is, but what is that?
well, basically, Arduino was designed as a very simple computer-like device, sell under $20, has a microcontroller on it. And a microcontroller, in layman's terms, is somewhat similar to a computer CPU. I mean, it has everything on it. It has a processor. It does all the arithmetic. It has storage on it and everything. And it's very inexpensive. You can buy them now for a few dollars or less. And so these folks in Italy put together a microprocessor with inputs and outputs to teach people. One is how to build devices that interact with the outside world, and then how to program it. And it's very inexpensive. It's easy to get into. You can buy a kit for $30, have everything you need, and the software is free for programming it. You just got to learn how to program it. So I thought that was so cool, especially because, you know, of its application to robotics, to Internet of Things, security systems, home automation. It all fits right in with that. And so I learned to program the Arduino and then its variants that came along. And I recommend people, if anybody interested, they want to find out how computers work. It's a really neat way to learn and inexpensive.
Yes. You actually got me into that. So
I know, I did.
I thank you for that, John. There's so much in your career that we could get into, but I don't want to get buried and make this too long. So I want to know, so next time we have breakfast, what's going to be the new thing you're going to show me that you now can do something from your iWatch or something?
Well, I've been having fun with my Apple Watch and programming that because that's something new to try out. But the latest thing, and I'm working on right now, and I don't know where it's going to go, we're going to go on a cruise this summer. Guess what I'm writing an app about? The cruise. I want an app that I can use. One is to keep track of the itinerary, but I want to, in the app, and I've done this part, I want to be able to access any photos I've taken with my iPhone, and I want to be able to tag them with things that are happening on the cruise. And I wanted a way to put that all together in one place. And that's what I've been writing an app for. So that's what I've been working on lately.
That sounds fascinating. I've seen so many of the apps that you've written there. Every one of them is good. So when the iWatch came out, your eyes must have just lit up with the exciting possibilities of an iWatch and an iPhone.
Well, yes. Well, the first thing I saw was, my goodness, I have this WeatherCat app, which is for people with weather stations, and they can use it to monitor the data on their weather stations. And so I said, gee, wouldn't that be cool if you could just take your watch and look and say, oh, yeah, it's 42 degrees back at the ranch. That's kind of windy, you know. So that's what I wanted to do. So I had written an app for the phone. So then I integrated the Apple Watch into that so the app basically on the iPhone talks to the watch and lets you select what you want to look at when you tap on your watch. And so that was my first excursion into the Apple Watch. So,
well, you've done so many very interesting things, John. I just want to say thank you for being here and I'm enjoying talking with you today at NC Media. Thanks to NC Media for hosting us today, and look forward to more great stories of the history of programming of the Grand Poobah.
Well, thank you, Gil. You know, talking about all this with you, you've really revved up my engines. I got to get back home and start coding again right away.
Great, John. Thanks much. We'll see you later.